Welcome to today's episode on the Six Realms of Existence. According to traditional Buddhist teachings, these are the 6 ways that we can be reborn. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit. This turns out to be part 1 of 2 on the 6 Realms of Existence. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about karma, the general ideas behind rebirth, and then the literal explanation of the 6 realms of existence. And in part 2, we will talk about the metaphorical interpretations of these teachings and the benefits of practicing them. Welcome to Letting Grow, the podcast about one of the spiritual journey's most difficult and courageous moments, letting go of who we think we should be so we can grow into who we most deeply are. I'm your host, Claire Villarreal, and I appreciate your joining me today. Greetings, friends, and welcome to this episode on the 6 realms of rebirth as described in traditional forms of Buddhism. So, if you're wondering what the 6 realms are, I want to give a little context for this. They are 6 types of rebirth that we can take once we leave our current lifetime. And there's a lot to it, so I'll kind of explain all these terms as we go. But basically, the 6 realms are the 3 lower realms of hell beings, hungry ghosts, and animals, and the three higher realms of humans, demigods, and gods. And if that doesn't make any sense to you, that's fine. I will explain it. And to begin with, I want to say that this description of the world, because it basically is telling us like who lives in our world system. We know humans, we know animals, but there's some non-physical beings, shall we say, that Buddhists also imagine living in this world system, and they also imagine us as being able to take these forms. So the whole idea of the 6 realms of rebirth depends on 2 fundamental concepts that also are not unique to Buddhism. They seem to be pre-Buddhist, just like the 6 realms of rebirth, but they were incorporated into Buddhism as it developed about 2,500 years ago in what is now India and Nepal. So these 2 basic ideas are karma and rebirth. And we've been talking a lot about rebirth in sort of a technical way, in a metaphorical way. But the idea of Buddhist rebirth is that we're kind of stuck in an endless cycle of being born, not understanding fully who and what we are, chasing after what we want, trying to avoid what we don't want, never quite getting it right, and then we die. And then we do the whole thing over again. And Buddhists and other Indian-derived religions would call this cycle samsara, which basically just means like a spin cycle. Like you're just cycling around and around and around, doing the same things, getting the same stuff wrong over and over again, basically endlessly until you wake up out of your delusions. And that is what enlightenment or awakening really means. Like the word Buddha is based on the word Bud, which means like to wake up. So really, when we talk about the 6 realms of rebirth, when we talk about karma, when we talk about any of these concepts that are fundamental to today's episode, we are talking about the heart of the Buddhist liberative endeavor. So these are the reasons that we want to wake up out of this, eons long dream that we've been in. But also, these are the things that are going to happen to us if we don't. So, rebirth in this system, it can happen an infinite number of times. It's just going to keep happening until we finally realize who we are, stop running after the things we think we want, that we think were going to give us happiness, stop trying to avoid the things that are going to bring us suffering, and start reorienting ourselves toward what is real, what is true in the world, and what's going to bring an actual end of suffering. And from a Buddhist perspective, and obviously this is common among, most spiritual traditions, that reorientation, if it's in the direction of what is ultimately true, is going to bring us to lasting happiness. So when Buddhists take refuge, or when we, contemplate the Dharma, when we think about the Buddha, all of these things are ways of orienting ourselves toward what is ultimately true from a Buddhist perspective, which are things like impermanence. Everything changes. We all kind of know that, even if we don't want to acknowledge it. Things like lack of an inherently existent self. If you believe in a cycle of rebirth, the self that we have now is definitely not the self that we've had in past lives, and it's not going to be the self that we have in future lives. So thinking that this one version of me is a pretty big mistake from that perspective. And there's also emptiness. The fact that nothing is inherently existent, everything is going to change. So there's some fundamental truths in Buddhism that kind of underpin the whole description of the six realms, the whole description of, rebirth. What is it? How does it function? How do we get out of it? So that's obviously a huge topic. We're just going to talk today about rebirth, about karma, about the six realms of existence. But I want you to know that what we're talking about now really connects with all the different pieces of the wisdom tradition of Buddhism. So that's a tiny introduction to rebirth. I want to give you now a tiny introduction to karma, because this idea is basically, it's a description of what keeps this whole cycle going in the first place. So karma, you may be familiar with the word, but often it's used in kind of like a slang sense these days, of like, oh, I have good parking karma, which means like, oh, I find a parking spot easily. So it's almost equated to like luck or something, or sometimes people think of it as fate, but really what the Sanskrit word means is just action. And karma in this sense, in the context of the cycle of death and rebirth, karma is any action taken with intention. So an action of body, an action also of speech, an action even of mind. So when we kind of let our minds run with thoughts of how much we dislike, I don't know, our political opponents or whoever it is, our opposing sports team, like when we let ourselves run with that, it's like we're creating this intention of wanting to kind of give into those thoughts, and it creates that habit pattern. And the more we do it and the more we give into it, the stronger that pattern becomes, so that even in one lifetime, you can really see, a pattern of disliking a certain group or being favorably inclined to a different group, that can like really strengthen over one lifetime. And then the idea is those likes and dislikes are what are going to pattern our lifetime in the future. So it can, shape the parents that we get in the future, because we'll be drawn to people with similar beliefs or, similar habit patterns. It can shape where we're going to be born, whether we're in a male or a female body, all this kind of stuff, according to traditional beliefs on the topic, is really based on karma, on our mental, verbal, and physical actions in this lifetime. We're creating our next lifetime. So karma is an action taken with intention, but karma, so that's like karma as a cause, but there's also karma as a result. So when we take an action and we sort of put that energy out there, it's almost like the laws of physics, you like throw an object up into the air and sooner or later it's going to come back down. So the idea behind karma is whatever we're putting out now is going to come back on our heads later. So if we're putting out good stuff, we're going to kind of get it back with interest. But also if we're putting out bad stuff, we're going to get that back with interest too. And, people tend to think about karma in terms of good and bad, or like in terms of a bank account, like, oh, the more good stuff I do, the more money I have piling up. And then when I do bad stuff, it's like taking the money out. But what I find really interesting about Buddhist descriptions of death and rebirth, and in some future season, we're going to talk about scientific research into reincarnation. And I think this also supports what I'm about to say. So it's not just good or bad deeds. It's really, we're shaping what we're interested in. We're shaping our habitual responses to things. And that's going to carry forward too. So for instance, there's a body of research that folks at the University of Virginia have been doing since the 60s, and they have lots of cases where, for instance, a child claims to remember a previous life as a shopkeeper. And then in the current life, the child plays that they're a shopkeeper. And there's a case of one kid who missed a lot of school because he was so busy playing that he was a shopkeeper that he just didn't want to go to school. So these habits can carry over from one lifetime to the next. Not just a good or a bad habit, but do you enjoy playing a musical instrument? Do you identify as a shopkeeper? So basically everything we're doing is creating momentum behind the stuff that we spend our time on. That would be my personal description of karma. It's everything we do, we're just adding that much more momentum to doing that in this lifetime and in upcoming lifetimes. And the thing is, in this lifetime, we can notice that we're doing a certain thing and intentionally stop doing that or do something different. Or if it's a thing that we find healthy and it's helpful and it's, helping us to grow in our lives, we can do more of that thing. But the thing that's kind of scary about traditional Buddhist descriptions of the rebirth process is that we do not have conscious control over where we go next. So we don't consciously choose our parents. And you hear, in sort of new age descriptions of the rebirth process, you'll hear people talking about choosing this lifetime or choosing their parents or whatever. And maybe that happens. I mean, who am I to say it doesn't? But according to the description of death and rebirth that I'm presenting today from the Buddhist tradition, we don't have that conscious choice. We're just drawn toward what feels natural to us. So that's how karma, there's a lot more we could say about karma, but in the context of death and rebirth and the six realms of existence, that's the role that karma plays. It's sort of what drives us forward in this lifetime, and it's also what drives us forward from one lifetime to the next. Because if you think about it, Buddhists talk about anatman, the lack of an inherently existent self. So what is it that goes from one lifetime to the next? And the Buddhist answer really is that it's holding to a sense of self, which is not really there, but holding to a sense of self kind of it keeps us deluded enough to keep thinking we're about to arrive, to keep thinking, oh, there is a me. I need to be in charge of, whatever, my life. I need some sense of continuity. And it's that sense of I, me, there's something that exists here that kind of keeps us going from one lifetime to the next, but it's really karma that shapes what happens to us from one lifetime to the next. So say that I decide I'm going to murder someone in this lifetime. I don't like them. I want to kill them. I have a strong intention to kill this person. This is an action motivated by hatred. So let's say I go out, I kill this person. From a Buddhist perspective, if I don't decide that was a bad idea at some point, if I'm just yeah, I totally killed that person. That's great. I have accomplished my goal. If that's where I land with it, and I never try and wash out that mental imprint from my mind, then there's the possibility, first of all, of getting born into a hell realm, because that's where you go if you really enjoy hatred and harming people and stuff like that. But there's also, even if I'm born as a human in my next lifetime, there's also the possibility that I'm going to be born into a bad situation where I'm harmed or abused. And if that doesn't happen, at some point down the future, that karma is definitely going to come back to me. So either I get killed or I get harmed, or for a whole bunch of lifetimes I have, some terrible health problem or something like that. And so the idea is you can't outrun your karma. It's going to get you sooner or later. And part of what spiritual practice is oriented toward doing is recognizing what is a bad idea and we shouldn't do it, so we can stop doing that thing. Part of it also is recognizing what's a good idea so we can be creating that good karma, but also part of it is to purify all the bad habits that we tend to get into and keep doing, so that we are not going to carry that karma over from one lifetime to the next. We're going through doing the work of purifying that stuff out, recognizing, you know what, that was not in accordance with who I want to be. I don't want to do that anymore. I feel regret for the bad actions that I have done. And this can sound a lot like shame or guilt or whatever, but in the Buddhist tradition, it's really about just recognizing, you know what, that wasn't a good idea. I regret having done it. I don't want to do it again. And that's kind of the way that we put an end to these just karmic reaction chains that can keep going over and over and over again, lifetime after lifetime. We're just trying the same approach to life, never works, and we just keep doing it again and again, as many of us do in this lifetime, for instance, in relationships or other types of repetitive habits that we may have. So that's just a little bit on karma, so that as we go through this description, it'll make sense to you what sort of the mechanics, so to speak, of rebirth are in this system. And what I've just described is kind of a literal take on rebirth into different realms of existence. You can also take this metaphorically in the sense that in each day, we may have a moment when we're kind of swept up into a powerful feeling of pride, or we're swept into a powerful feeling of hatred, whatever it is. And as long as we're kind of stuck in that state, you could say we've taken rebirth as a god or as a hell being. So I want to talk later in the episode about the ways that we can understand and use these teachings metaphorically, but I first want to present them literally, because if you don't know what the literal presentation is, it doesn't make a lot of sense to try and jump in and explain it metaphorically. Hi friends, want to join the Letting Grow tribe? I'll be starting a bi-weekly newsletter in early 2021 with links to articles, YouTube videos, other podcasts, and basically the best of the rebirth content I've come across lately. Some examples of the kinds of things I want to share with you include a snap judgment story about a bull who seemed to be the reincarnation of another bull, a viral article about the creepy things kids say, but some of them 100% seem to refer to previous lives, and some excerpts from the book I'm writing now about the lessons Tibetan Buddhist teachings on life and death offer to those of us going through transitions. Spoiler alert, that's all of us. Best of all, if you're subscribed, you'll get links to join free live video calls with me and other subscribers every couple of months. So pause this episode now, find the newsletter sign-up link in the show notes, and join your tribe. There are 6 realms of rebirth, and I mentioned earlier that there are 3 lower realms and 3 higher realms, or upper realms. And you're born into each of these states based on actions in previous lifetimes. So the 3 lower realms, starting with the lowest, is the hell beings. And Buddhists have some very elaborate descriptions of the hell realms and hell beings and how hell beings are tortured. And I'm going to spare you that because personally, I grew up in a pretty fundamentalist Christian church, and a whole bunch of emphasis on hell and how you're going to go to hell doesn't really work for me. And I think for a lot of modern Western people, it doesn't really work for them either. So I'll just give you the Buddhist description of the hell realms. If you want to read more, you can read Words of My Perfect Teacher, Tantric Practice, and Nyingma. These are both like very traditional descriptions of the Buddhist world and of the Buddhist like foundational practices. And I'll have links to those in the show notes. So the hell beings are people who have really given into hatred in their lifetime. Like they went to the dark side. They enjoyed hating people. They enjoyed causing harm. And there's a lot of emphasis in the traditional teachings on hatred, but I think there should also be emphasis on fear. Because when we see people acting out of hatred, there's almost always some sort of fear behind it. Like if we think about Nazi Germany, there was so much hatred and so much destruction, but there was also fear of almost like an existential fear. You know, after Germany lost or surrendered in World War I, there's terrible economic crisis and just a bad situation. So I think there's a connection between fear and hatred that I find very useful when I'm thinking about the hell realms. You know, if we give into fear, if we justify acts of hatred or violence against other people, verbally, you know, physically, whatever it may be, even enjoying thinking hateful things about other people, I think there's an opportunity there to dig into what's the fear beneath that. So anyway, hell beings just spend like a super long time being tormented. So there are all these descriptions of like how long a day is in a hell realm, and it can be like, you know, 300 years of human time equals like a day of a hell being, and then like the lifetime of a hell being will be like 3,000 years of those days. So it's a really long time, but it's not forever. So this is a big difference between, say, a Christian description of a hell realm, a Christian description of hell, which is like permanent, it's eternal. Like you go to hell and that's it. Like you're not going to get reborn out of that eventually, as far as I know. Maybe there's some Christian sect that believes that. But in this belief, you're going to work off that bad karma, even if it takes a really long time. And then eventually you're going to get reborn into a different state of existence. So that's the hell realm. basically the experience that you have in a hell realm is of being tormented. You're always afraid. You're always full of hatred. Because you're threatened all the time, you also threaten other people all the time. It is thoroughly unpleasant. There are hot hells, there are cold hells, intermediate hells. There's some very vivid descriptions of how hell beings' flesh splits apart in the cold hells because they're so cold. Sounds awful to me. I do not like cold. So I think that's enough description of the hell realms. So the next realm up is the hungry ghost realm, and there are different types of hungry ghosts described in the traditional teachings. But the basic idea of the hungry ghost realm is that you can never get enough. So for instance, there's a description of hungry ghosts that have like a great big mouth, a great big belly, but a tiny little throat. So when they're trying to get enough food to fill their bellies, hardly anything will fit down their throat. So they're just always hungry. Or there's another description of hungry ghosts where they finally find some food or some drink, and as they're coming up to it, they're so hungry, they see it, and then maybe that food turns into poop, and the drink turns into blood and pus. Like, it just becomes these disgusting substances that don't really nourish the person. And rebirth into this realm is based on being stingy. So it's basically like a much bigger acting out of this idea that you can't get enough or you don't have enough. So there are all these stories of people who, don't make offerings to wandering mendicants who come to their door, or they have a lot, but they feel like they can't share because a lot is not enough. I find this description really poignant. We're going to talk about it more in the later section on the metaphorical understanding of these states. But basically, hungry ghosts are people who have lived their previous lives in that state of not enough, not enough. I've got to grab everything I can for myself. But even when I grab that, it's still not going to nourish that part of myself that feels undernourished. So the dominant experience in the hungry ghost realm is of just spending all your time trying to get food and water and not being able to get it. And the cause for a rebirth into a hungry ghost realm is stinginess. So next up we have animals. And this is the least bad of the three lower realms. I think we can all identify with or recognize the sufferings that animals undergo, which is mostly they are subject to being eaten by other animals. They're always trying to find food. If these are domesticated animals, then they're always subject to being, if they're sheep, they can be shorn. If they're being raised for food, then sooner or later they're going to be killed. Tibetans have a very close relationship with yaks. So you'll often hear about, a yak will have to carry these burdens for nomads as they're on the move, and the yak doesn't have a choice. And then sooner or later, that yak is going to be killed for food. So it's just kind of a lifetime spent, again, in like a very, very basic survival mode. And it's said that the sort of primary characteristic of a lifetime as an animal is stupidity, just dullness, not knowing or understanding what's going on around you. And the cause for being reborn as an animal is that kind of dullness and stupidity and lack of interest really in anything other than like basic physical needs or desires during this lifetime as a human. And again, I think this is a rich area to dive into a little bit more deeply in the metaphorical understanding of these realms of rebirth. So we've wrapped up the three lower realms now, and we're going to talk about the three upper realms. And the humans are sort of the lowest of the upper realms, and also one that's pretty familiar to us, because we are probably all humans listening to this. And so we all know the experience of being a human. It is, according to these teachings, and according to probably most of our own observations, it is better than being an animal. We have a lot more control over ourselves, a lot more autonomy. We're not usually worried about being eaten or killed for food by other humans. So that's good. And it's tempting after hearing the descriptions of these lower realms to think, oh, well, human, that's a pretty great lifetime. But the thing is, according to these traditional teachings, first of all, we have our own sufferings, and we don't want to minimize the sufferings of the human realm just because we may not personally be experiencing them right now. So if you think about, all the famine that exists in the world, all the different forms of abuse that can happen to kids or older people or just everybody, we could be living in a war zone. We could be living under a dictatorship. So there's a lot in the human realm too that really exposes us to potentially a lot of suffering. And even if we don't have those types of suffering, we still have the suffering of birth, aging, sickness, and death. We have the suffering of wanting to get what we think we need or wanting to get what we really want and not always being able to. Or once we do get it, now we have to maintain it, or now we're constantly worried about losing it, or there are certain things that we don't want to have happen to us, like having a serious illness or having a serious accident, losing our job, and we don't necessarily have control over those either. So basically, there's a lot to being human that also is not necessarily what we would like for our next lifetime. I do want to say, though, being human is supposed to be the most favorable rebirth for actually realizing the nature of reality, for waking up, for becoming enlightened, if you want to put it that way. So we want a human rebirth. That's our goal. And in a lot of traditional Buddhist teachings and practices, you'll actually make aspirations not just to have a human life, but to have a human life in which you are able to connect with like a genuine spiritual teacher. You have the freedom and the opportunity to practice spiritual teachings and to, really progress not just into a better state of cyclic existence, but to progress toward getting out of the cycle altogether. And then, if we so choose, at least the Tibetan view of this is, we can keep coming back, but it's to help people instead of being powerlessly thrown back into this round of existence again and again and again. So when it comes to the experiences and the potential sufferings of the human realm, we're pretty familiar with that. According to the teachings, the cause for a human lifetime is that we've done good things in our previous life. And we've probably, if you're listening to this, if you're interested in spiritual practice and death and rebirth, metaphorically or literally, and how we can all, become better people, the tradition would say you probably spent a previous life doing some great stuff to be in this position. So we want to continue that. And in the Tibetan tradition, there will be, dedication prayers, for instance, where you say, in all lives, may I meet good lamas. May I always be able to progress in the Dharma. So if we're doing those sorts of things in this lifetime, making the aspirations to be human again and to have favorable circumstances again in our next lifetimes, then according to this way of thinking, that's really our best, our shortest shot for getting out of this cycle that just otherwise is going to repeat over and over and over and over again. And it's also the best thing we can do for everyone else too, because we'll be much more useful to all living beings if we are awakened and if we can, lead other people out of this crappy cyclic state that we're all stuck in at the moment. The next realm up from the human realm is the demigod realm. And maybe it's a little difficult to understand demigods without understanding gods, so I'll just very briefly explain a little bit about the god realm. The gods, it's sort of like the peak of cyclic existence. They have tremendously long lives, they have all these pleasures, they're practically immortal, so even if they get into a war with somebody, they always win. So it's like this peak of cyclic existence. The demigods are almost like that, but not quite. So the demigods have a really long lifespan. They are physically beautiful. They have all these pleasures, but not as much as the gods. And the other thing I found really evocative about traditional descriptions of the demigod realm is that there's this wish-fulfilling tree. And the roots of the tree are in the demigod realm, but the fruit of the tree falls in the god realm. So the demigods, I love this description so much. The demigods always have this sense of that should be mine. That should be mine. So this type of existence is really driven by jealousy. What I have is not enough. I need what that person has. So the demigods, it is said, are always, these are obviously non-physical beings. Whether or not you believe in them literally, it's up to you. I'm not sure I do, but I love the description of them, and we'll talk more about them in the metaphorical part. But basically, the demigods are always making war against the gods. They want to claim back what they think is theirs, the fruit of this tree. And the thing is, they're demigods, so they always lose. But they're not deterred. They keep trying to get what this other group has, and they just never quite make it. So the cause for being reborn as a demigod, not surprisingly, is living a life with a lot of jealousy. And there's not a lot that's really said about this group of beings. Like, there's not a lot of stories of, like, famous demigods that the Buddha interacted with or something like that. But it speaks to me that there's a group that feels like they're almost good enough, but not quite. And now we come to the gods. So I gave a little brief description earlier of their long lifespan. It said that in the god realm, just looking at food, you completely enjoy the experience of eating it. If they're beautiful partners that just look at each other, they have all the pleasure of like sexually coupling with each other. So it's just this realm that's suffused with pleasure. And it sounds amazing, right? I mean, who doesn't want to live that life? So what could possibly be the suffering aspect of this realm? Well, according to Buddhist teachings, these gods live for a really long time. So similar to hell beings, they have these long lifespans. And the thing is, people are reborn into a god realm because they've done a lot of really good things. So they have like a lot of positive karma. But once they're in the god realm, they don't realize they got there because of their previous life karma. They think, I am it. This is where it's at. I have it all together. Like, I have all this because I deserve it, and it's always going to be mine. So there's kind of a sense of entitlement that I get from the description of these long-lived gods. So they're basically blissed out all the time. Just for eons and eons and eons, they have everything they want, everything they need. Every time the demigods try and attack them, they are able to defend themselves. They're practically immortal. But at the end of their lifetime, for 7 god days, they see what their next rebirth is going to be. And remember that a god day might be hundreds of years of human days. So these can be really experientially long periods of time where the gods' flower garlands begin to fade. Their beautiful garments begin to get dirty and frayed. Basically, everyone in the god realm knows that that god is about to die. And that god is seeing where they're going to go next. So if they're going to go from this like blissful, amazing realm to a human realm where they're going to be an infant, they're going to poop on themselves, they're going to face, potentially starvation and warfare and all these things. Like, that's really terrifying to this god who thought they had made it. They didn't think this was an impermanent situation. They thought they were set. So that is the specific suffering of the god realm. And the cause of rebirth into the god realm is pride. So yes, maybe we've done all these wonderful things. We've created a lot of good karma, but all of that is a little bit tainted with pride. And pride in the sense of feeling like, yeah, I am amazing. I do deserve all of this. Maybe lesser people just haven't figured out how to get to where I have gotten to by my own merits. And thinking that we've gotten to where we are just through our own merits, not recognizing all of our own and other people's hard work that went into it, it's a pretty good description of a certain type of pride and definitely entitlement. So those are the 3 higher realms, and of the 3, it's really the human realm that we would be making aspirations to be reborn into in our next lifetime. All right, friends, thanks for joining me for part 1 of this 2-part series on the 6 Realms of Rebirth. The second part is also available now, so please give it a listen. Thanks for coming along for today's exploration of the process of letting grow. If you found this episode helpful, please share it. And subscribe now wherever you listen to podcasts so you're always in the loop. For links to more content related to today's episode, please see the show notes. See you again next week.